My name is Stephen Hawking. I am a theoretical physicist and cosmologist, and I have spent the better part of my life contemplating the deepest mysteries of our universe. Today, I need to tell you something that might fundamentally change how you think about humanity's future among the stars. For decades, we have dreamed of establishing a permanent human presence on the moon. Yet despite all our technological advances, despite landing humans on its surface more than 50 years ago, we still haven't built a single lasting structure there. Why? The answer is far more complex and disturbing than most people realize. When I first began studying physics at Oxford, the Apollo missions were capturing the world's imagination. I watched those grainy black and white images of Neil Armstrong taking his first steps, and like millions of others, I believed we were witnessing the beginning of humanity's expansion into the cosmos. But here we are, more than half a century later, and the moon remains as barren and uninhabited as it was when our ancestors first gazed up at it from caves. This isn't a failure of ambition or funding, though those play a part. This is a confrontation with the brutal realities of physics, biology, and engineering that make lunar habitation one of the most challenging endeavors our species has ever contemplated. Let me start with something that will surprise you. The distance between Earth and the Moon averages 238,900 miles. That number might seem manageable when you consider we routinely fly commercial aircraft 12,000 miles across the Pacific. But space is not the Pacific Ocean. Every single pound of material we send to the Moon costs approximately $10,000 using current technology. Think about that for a moment. The laptop you're watching this on weighs roughly 4 pounds. To send it to the Moon would cost $40,000, and that's just for transport, not including the specialized engineering required to make it function in space. Now, multiply that by everything needed for a lunar base. A basic habitat for just 4 people would require approximately 50,000 pounds of materials. That's $500 million in transport costs alone, before we've even begun construction. But the financial burden, staggering as it is, represents only the tip of an iceberg that goes much deeper into fundamental physics and human biology. During my years at Cambridge, I spent considerable time thinking about the nature of gravity and its effects on space and time. The Moon's gravitational field is only 16.6% as strong as Earth's. You might think this sounds advantageous, making everything lighter and easier to move. But gravity isn't just about weight. It's about how fluids behave in your body, how your bones maintain their density, how your cardiovascular system pumps blood to your brain. Human beings evolved over millions of years in Earth's gravitational field. Remove that constant force, and our bodies begin to break down in ways that are both predictable and terrifying. NASA's studies on astronauts who have spent extended time in microgravity reveal bone density loss of 1 to 2% per month. On the Moon, with its reduced gravity, this process slows but doesn't stop. After just 6 months in lunar gravity, an astronaut would lose approximately 6% of their bone mass. Their muscles would atrophy, their cardiovascular system would weaken, and their inner ear would struggle to maintain balance. These aren't temporary inconveniences. These are fundamental biological incompatibilities with long-term lunar habitation. But let's set aside the human factor for a moment and focus on something even more immediate: radiation. Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere create a protective bubble around our planet, shielding us from the constant bombardment of cosmic rays and solar radiation. The Moon has no such protection. It sits naked in the cosmos, exposed to radiation levels that would be lethal to unprotected humans within days. The lunar surface receives approximately 100 times more radiation than Earth's surface. During a solar storm, radiation levels can spike to thousands of times Earth normal. These aren't abstract numbers. They represent DNA damage, cancer risks, and cellular destruction that would make long-term lunar habitation a death sentence without massive protective infrastructure. I remember a conversation I had with a NASA engineer in the 1980s. He told me something that has stayed with me ever since. "Dr. Hawking, we can send humans to the Moon, but keeping them alive there is like trying to maintain a deep-sea research station on the ocean floor. Except the ocean is trying to kill you with radiation. The pressure difference could explosively decompress your habitat, and the nearest rescue is 3 days away, traveling at 25,000 miles per hour. This brings us to one of the most overlooked challenges, the lunar environment itself. The moon's day-night cycle lasts 28 Earth days. For 14 consecutive Earth days, the lunar surface bakes in direct sunlight with no atmosphere to moderate the temperature. Surface temperatures reach 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, for 14 days, it's plunged into darkness, where temperatures drop to minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a temperature swing of 500 degrees. Every component of a lunar base would need to survive these extreme temperature cycles repeatedly. Metals expand and contract, seals fail, electronic components drift out of specification, and structural materials develop stress fractures. On Earth, we have the luxury of a stable temperature environment. On the Moon, everything must be engineered to withstand conditions more extreme than anywhere on our planet. Let me share something from my own experience that illustrates the complexity of these challenges. In the early 1990s, I was consulted on a theoretical design for a lunar research station. The engineering team had spent 2 years developing what they believed was a robust design. Then someone asked a simple question. How do we repair a broken seal in a spacesuit glove when the nearest replacement is 239,000 miles away? This question led to a 6-month redesign process. Every single component had to have redundant backups, local repair capabilities, or be robust enough to never fail. The mass of the station tripled. The cost increased by a factor of 10. And this was just for a 4-person research outpost, not a permanent settlement. But perhaps the most sobering realization came when we calculated the logistics of sustaining human life. A single human being consumes approximately 2 pounds of oxygen, 7 pounds of water, and 3 pounds of food daily. For a crew of 4 people, that's 48 pounds of consumables every day. Over the course of a year, that's 17,520 pounds of life support materials, every pound of which costs $10,000 to transport from Earth. The mathematics of lunar colonization quickly become overwhelming. A self-sustaining lunar base would need to produce its own oxygen, water, and food. This requires massive industrial infrastructure, solar panels or nuclear reactors for power, electrolysis equipment to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, atmospheric processors to manage air quality, hydroponic farms to grow food, manufacturing facilities to produce spare parts, and mining equipment to extract resources from lunar soil. Each of these systems requires specialists to operate and maintain them, but specialists need life support, which requires more infrastructure, which requires more specialists. The exponential growth in complexity and cost creates what engineers call a tyranny of the rocket equation. Every additional pound of equipment requires more fuel to transport it, which adds more weight, which requires even more fuel. During my work on black hole thermodynamics, I became intimately familiar with the concept of event horizons, points beyond which certain processes become irreversible. Lunar colonization faces its own kind of event horizon, a critical mass threshold below which a base cannot be self-sustaining. Our calculations suggested this threshold requires an initial investment of approximately 50,000 people and infrastructure massing over 1 million tons. To put this in perspective, the International Space Station, humanity's most complex space construction project, has a mass of 420 tons and cost over $150 billion. A self-sustaining lunar base would require infrastructure 2,300 times more massive than the ISS. But even if we could overcome these logistical nightmares, even if we could somehow transport millions of tons of equipment to the moon, we would face challenges that go beyond engineering and into the realm of fundamental physics. The moon's low gravity doesn't just affect human physiology. It affects how fluids behave, how convection works, how heat transfer occurs, and how materials interact at the molecular level. Consider something as simple as cooking food. On Earth, hot air rises and cool air falls, creating natural convection that distributes heat evenly. In the moon's low gravity, this process barely functions. Hot and cool air tend to remain stratified, creating temperature gradients that make cooking, heating, and cooling systems work completely differently than on Earth. Water behaves strangely too. In low gravity, surface tension becomes a dominant force. Water doesn't pour from containers. It forms floating spheres that stick to surfaces through capillary action. Every water system would need to be redesigned to account for these physics changes. Toilets, showers, drinking systems, fire suppression, cooling loops, all would require completely new approaches. The psychological challenges are equally daunting. Imagine being confined in a small, artificial environment where stepping outside without a spacesuit means instant death. Where the sky is always black, where Earth hangs in the sky as a constant reminder of everything you've left behind, where the closest human beings are 3 days away at best, and where any mechanical failure could kill everyone you live with. Antarctica provides our closest analog for the psychological stresses of lunar habitation. Researchers at Antarctic stations experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and interpersonal conflict despite being on the same planet as their families and friends. Now imagine that isolation multiplied by 1,000, with the added stress of knowing that rescue is not just difficult, but potentially impossible. I've spent much of my career thinking about the end of the universe, about the eventual heat death of the cosmos, about the ultimate fate of all matter and energy. These cosmic perspectives have taught me to think in terms of deep time and vast scales. From this perspective, I can tell you that establishing a permanent human presence beyond Earth isn't just desirable. It's essential for our long-term survival. But the moon, despite its proximity and familiarity, may not be the stepping stone we've always assumed it would be. The fundamental problem is that the moon offers few of the resources necessary for human civilization. It has no atmosphere, no liquid water readily available on the surface, no organic compounds, and no easily accessible heavy metals. Everything that makes life possible on Earth is either absent or locked away in forms that require massive industrial processes to extract and purify. Mars, despite being much farther away, actually offers better prospects for long-term human habitation. It has an atmosphere, even if it's thin and toxic. It has water ice at the poles and subsurface. It has a 24-hour day cycle that matches human circadian rhythms. It has seasonal variations that, while extreme, provide some environmental variety. Most importantly, it has the raw materials necessary to potentially create a self-sustaining human civilization. The moon, by contrast, is more like trying to establish a permanent research station in the middle of the Sahara Desert, except the desert is bombarded with deadly radiation, swings between temperatures that would kill you instantly, and has no air to breathe. Oh, and the nearest supply depot is a 3-day rocket flight away. This doesn't mean we should abandon lunar exploration. The moon offers tremendous scientific value. Its surface preserves a 4 billion-year record of cosmic impacts that has been erased from Earth by geological processes. Its far side provides a radio-quiet environment perfect for astronomy, shielded from Earth's electromagnetic noise. And yes, learning to operate on the moon would teach us valuable lessons about operating in space. But we need to be honest about the limitations. A lunar base will likely remain a research outpost, like the Antarctic research stations, requiring constant resupply from Earth and housing only a small number of researchers for limited periods. The dream of lunar cities, of families raised on the moon, of a self-sustaining lunar civilization, runs up against fundamental physics and biology that makes such dreams extraordinarily difficult to realize. Let me tell you about a calculation I did in the late 1990s that changed my perspective on this issue. I was trying to determine the minimum viable population for a self-sustaining human settlement. Taking into account genetic diversity, skill specialization, industrial capacity, and redundancy against catastrophic loss, the number I calculated was approximately 50,000 people. 50,000 people on the moon would require life support systems capable of recycling air and water with near-perfect efficiency, agricultural systems producing millions of pounds of food annually, manufacturing facilities capable of producing everything from computer chips to spacesuits, mining and processing operations, extracting and refining lunar materials, and transportation systems moving people and materials around the lunar surface. The energy requirements alone are staggering. Such a civilization would need power generation equivalent to a large city on Earth, but using only solar panels that work for 14 days, then shut down for 14 days, or nuclear reactors that must be transported from Earth at enormous cost. The engineering challenges multiply exponentially with every requirement we add. But perhaps most troubling is what we've learned about the psychological and social dynamics of isolated communities. Even here on Earth, with access to outside communication and the possibility of leaving, intentional communities have a depressingly high failure rate. Whether we look at religious communes, eco-villages, or research stations, human groups in isolation tend toward conflict, factionalism, and eventual dissolution. Now imagine that same social dynamic in an environment where leaving isn't just difficult or expensive. It's potentially impossible. Where conflicts can't be resolved by people walking away because there's nowhere to walk to. Where every disagreement carries the implicit threat that one faction might control life support systems or transportation off the moon. The history of isolated human settlements is not encouraging. From the Donner Party to the Franklin expedition, from Jamestown to the Roanoke colony, humans in isolation under stress have shown a disturbing tendency toward breakdown of social order. The moon would present all these stresses magnified by the constant presence of death just outside the airlock. During the writing of my book, A Brief History of Time, I spent considerable time thinking about the anthropic principle, the idea that the universe appears fine-tuned for human existence because we are here to observe it. The moon presents us with the opposite situation. It's a world seemingly designed to be hostile to human life in every possible way. The regolith, or lunar soil, is not soil at all, but finely ground rock and glass created by billions of years of meteorite impacts. This dust is extraordinarily abrasive and gets into everything. It damages equipment, clogs filters, and is toxic when inhaled. Unlike Earth soil, which is full of organic matter and water, lunar regolith is sterile and jagged. It sticks to everything through electrostatic charge and is nearly impossible to remove completely. Every surface operation on the moon would be conducted in this environment of floating, abrasive, toxic dust. Spacesuits would wear out rapidly. Seals would be constantly compromised. Moving parts would be abraded and damaged. And unlike a construction site on Earth where workers can go home at the end of the day to clean up, lunar workers would bring this contamination back into their living spaces every time they returned from surface operations. The more I've studied the challenges of lunar habitation, the more I've come to believe that our species may be approaching one of those inflection points that define the future of civilizations. We have the technological capability to establish a foothold on the moon, but doing so would require a level of international cooperation, financial commitment, and risk tolerance that may exceed what our current political and economic systems can deliver. The cost of establishing even a basic research station on the moon would dwarf the Manhattan Project, the Apollo program, and the International Space Station combined. We're talking about an investment measured not in billions, but in trillions of dollars, sustained over decades, with no guarantee of success and no possibility of profit in any traditional sense. Yet the alternative, remaining bound to Earth indefinitely, poses its own existential risks. As I've written before, keeping all of humanity on a single planet is like keeping all your eggs in one basket. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, climate change, nuclear war, or any number of other catastrophes could end human civilization if we remain trapped on Earth. This brings me to what I believe is the fundamental question of our time. Not whether we can establish permanent bases on other worlds, but whether we can evolve the social, political, and economic systems necessary to undertake such massive, long-term projects. The moon doesn't just challenge our engineering capabilities. It challenges our ability to work together as a species toward goals that extend beyond electoral cycles and quarterly profit reports. I've lived through the end of the Cold War, the rise of the Internet, the sequencing of the human genome, and the detection of gravitational waves. Each of these achievements required sustained effort over decades, international cooperation, and massive financial investment. But all of them offered relatively short-term benefits that justified the investment. Lunar colonization offers no such short-term payoffs. It requires us to think and plan on timescales that exceed individual human lifetimes, to make investments whose benefits won't be realized for generations, and to cooperate across national boundaries on a scale we've never attempted before. Perhaps this is the real reason we haven't built a base on the moon yet. It's not just that the engineering challenges are difficult, though they are. It's not just that the costs are enormous, though they are. It's that lunar colonization requires us to become a different kind of species than we've ever been before. one capable of truly long-term thinking and unprecedented cooperation. The physics of rocket propulsion, the biology of human adaptation, and the engineering of life support systems are solvable problems. We have the knowledge and technology to address them, given sufficient resources and time. But the social and political challenges may be far more difficult to overcome. Consider this: the International Space Station, our most successful example of international cooperation in space, has been continuously inhabited for over 20 years. But it exists only because it serves the immediate political and scientific interests of the participating nations. It's a symbol of cooperation, a platform for research, and a demonstration of technological capability. A lunar base would offer none of these immediate benefits while requiring far greater investment and risk. The tragedy is that our window of opportunity may be limited. The political stability and economic prosperity that make such large-scale projects possible are not permanent features of human civilization. The international cooperation that built the ISS could disappear in the face of economic collapse, resource wars, or climate catastrophes. The technological capabilities we're developing today might not be available to future generations if our civilization faces significant disruption. This is why I've spent recent years advocating not just for space exploration, but for the development of what I call civilization insurance. We need multiple independent settlements beyond Earth, not just for the adventure or the science, but as a hedge against the possibility that something might go wrong here on our home planet. The Moon, despite all its challenges, remains our closest neighbor. It's 3 days away instead of 9 months. It's in our gravitational well instead of orbiting independently around the Sun. It offers opportunities to test technologies and gain experience that would be invaluable for missions to Mars or the moons of Jupiter. But we need to approach lunar development with realistic expectations. The Moon will likely never be home to millions of people. It will probably never be economically self-sustaining. It won't be the backup Earth that some have envisioned. But it could be something almost as valuable: humanity's first permanent foothold beyond our home planet, a place where we learn to live and work in space, a stepping stone to destinations that offer better prospects for large-scale human settlement. In my final years, as I think about the legacy our generation will leave to future ones, I find myself both hopeful and concerned. Hopeful because human ingenuity and determination have repeatedly overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The same species that learned to fly, split the atom, and decode the human genome can certainly figure out how to live on the Moon. But concerned because the challenges of space colonization require us to overcome not just technical obstacles, but fundamental limitations in how we organize ourselves as a civilization. We need institutions capable of planning and executing projects that span decades. We need economic systems that can justify investments whose benefits won't be realized for generations. We need political systems that can maintain commitment to goals that extend beyond election cycles. The question isn't really whether building a base on the Moon is impossible. The question is whether we're capable of becoming the kind of species that could make such a thing possible. Can we learn to think beyond our immediate self-interest? Can we cooperate across national, cultural, and ideological boundaries? Can we commit resources to projects whose benefits our grandchildren will enjoy rather than ourselves? These are not technical questions. They're questions about human nature and the future of human civilization. The Moon hangs in our sky every night as a reminder of both our cosmic insignificance and our cosmic potential. Whether we ever establish a permanent presence there may depend less on solving engineering problems and more on solving the fundamental challenge of learning to act as citizens of the cosmos rather than just inhabitants of Earth. The universe is vast, ancient, and largely hostile to life as we know it. Earth, and possibly the Moon, may be the only places within many light years where human consciousness can exist. Whether we expand beyond our home planet, whether we establish that first precarious foothold on another world, may determine whether human consciousness survives the next millennium. That responsibility, that opportunity, and that challenge define our generation in ways we're only beginning to understand. The Moon awaits, patient and unchanging, while we figure out whether we're ready to take that next great step in human evolution. The answer may determine not just our future among the stars, but whether we have a future at all. The implications of this challenge extend far beyond space exploration. When I consider the fundamental physics that govern life support systems, I'm struck by how they mirror the constraints that govern all complex systems. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that entropy always increases in isolated systems. A lunar base is, by definition, an isolated system trying to maintain order in an environment that constantly pushes toward disorder. Every breath an astronaut takes converts oxygen to carbon dioxide. Every movement generates heat that must be dissipated. Every electronic device produces waste heat and electromagnetic interference. Every biological process creates waste products that must be processed or removed. In Earth's biosphere, these processes are handled by vast natural systems that have evolved over billions of years. On the Moon, every single one must be artificially maintained by machines that can and will fail. I learned something profound about failure modes during my work with black hole mechanics. In the vicinity of a black hole, there exists what we call the point of no return, beyond which escape becomes impossible regardless of how much energy you apply. Lunar base operations face similar threshold effects. When life support systems begin to fail, there are critical points beyond which recovery becomes impossible, no matter how skilled your engineers or how abundant your spare parts. NASA's studies of closed ecological systems have revealed disturbing patterns. Biosphere 2, the ambitious experiment in Arizona, was designed to be a completely closed ecosystem supporting 8 people for 2 years. Despite massive funding, careful planning, and the ability to receive emergency supplies from outside, the experiment nearly ended in disaster. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. Carbon dioxide spiked to toxic levels. The agricultural systems failed to produce sufficient food. Interpersonal conflicts escalated to the point where the participants barely spoke to each other. Now imagine Biosphere 2 transported to the Moon, where emergency resupply takes 3 days minimum and costs millions of dollars per pound. Where a single catastrophic failure could kill everyone before help could arrive. Where the psychological stress is magnified by the knowledge that Earth hangs in the black sky as a constant reminder of everything you cannot reach. The medical challenges alone would require revolutionary advances in space medicine. On Earth, if someone suffers a heart attack, stroke, or serious injury, they can be in an emergency room within minutes. On the Moon, the nearest cardiac surgeon is 239,000 miles away. Every lunar resident would need to be simultaneously patient and doctor, capable of performing emergency medical procedures on themselves and others with limited equipment and no possibility of medical evacuation. Consider pregnancy and childbirth. No human being has ever been born beyond Earth's gravitational field. We have no idea how fetal development would proceed in lunar gravity. We don't know if human reproduction is even possible in that environment. Animal studies suggest that low gravity interferes with normal embryonic development in ways that could be fatal or could produce severe developmental abnormalities. A lunar colony that cannot reproduce is not a colony at all. It's an extended research expedition with an expiration date. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we solve all these problems. Let's imagine we develop closed-loop life support systems that work reliably for decades. Let's assume we create medical facilities capable of handling any emergency. Let's suppose we figure out how to produce food, manufacture spare parts, and process raw materials using only lunar resources. Even then, we face a challenge that may be insurmountable: the economics of interplanetary trade. For a lunar colony to be truly self-sustaining, it must produce something of value to Earth. It must export goods or services that justify the enormous cost of maintaining trade relationships across the void of space. The history of human colonization shows this pattern repeatedly. The American colonies exported tobacco, cotton, and raw materials. Australia exported wool and gold. Every successful colony in human history has been economically justified by resources that couldn't be obtained more cheaply elsewhere. What could the Moon export to Earth that would justify the cost of interplanetary shipping? Helium-3, a rare isotope that could theoretically fuel fusion reactors, exists in lunar regolith. But we don't have working fusion reactors yet. And even if we did, the infrastructure required to mine, process, and transport helium-3 would cost trillions of dollars. Rare Earth elements exist on the Moon, but launching them to Earth would cost far more than mining them here, even from the most difficult terrestrial locations. The only resource the moon possesses that might justify interplanetary economics is energy. Solar power on the moon, unfiltered by atmosphere and available for 14 continuous days at a time, could potentially generate enormous amounts of electricity. This power could be beamed to Earth using microwave transmission, providing clean energy to our home planet. But the engineering challenges of space-based solar power are staggering. The transmission systems would need to be larger than cities, precisely aligned, and capable of operating reliably for decades in the harsh lunar environment. The receiving stations on Earth would need to be equally massive. The efficiency losses in the microwave transmission process would be substantial, and the whole system would be vulnerable to space weather, debris impacts, and equipment failures that could shut down power to millions of people. During my collaboration with Roger Penrose on the mathematics of black holes, we developed what became known as the Penrose-Hawking singularity theorems. These theorems prove that under general relativity, singularities are not just possible, but inevitable under certain conditions. I see similar mathematical inevitabilities in the economics of lunar colonization. The cost curves, the energy requirements, and the failure probabilities create mathematical constraints that may make large-scale lunar settlement impossible regardless of technological advances. The most sobering calculation involves what economists call the discount rate, the mathematical expression of how we value future benefits versus present costs. Lunar colonization requires enormous upfront investments whose benefits won't be realized for decades or centuries. At any reasonable discount rate, these future benefits become essentially worthless in present economic calculations. This isn't just an academic concern. It explains why private companies, despite their stated interest in space development, focus on near-Earth activities like satellite deployment and space tourism. The return on investment for lunar development is so far in the future and so uncertain that it doesn't make economic sense for any profit-driven organization. Government space programs can ignore short-term profit calculations, but they face different constraints. Political systems rarely maintain consistent priorities across multiple election cycles. The Apollo program succeeded because it had clear political objectives and a defined timeline. Lunar colonization would require sustained political will for decades or centuries, something no government in human history has demonstrated for projects of this scale. Perhaps most fundamentally, lunar colonization challenges our basic assumptions about what it means to be human. We evolved as terrestrial creatures, adapted to Earth's gravity, atmosphere, and 24-hour day-night cycle. Our psychology, our social structures, our cultural traditions, all developed in the context of abundant natural resources and a forgiving biosphere. The humans who eventually live permanently on the moon, if any ever do, will necessarily be different from us. They will live their entire lives in artificial environments, dependent on machines for every breath. Their children will grow up knowing that the natural world exists only in pictures and videos. Their social structures will develop in isolation from the mainstream of human culture. Over generations, they may cease to be recognizably human in any sense we would understand. Low gravity will change their bone structure and muscle development. Isolation will alter their language and cultural practices. The stress of living in a hostile environment may select for psychological traits very different from those that characterize terrestrial humans. This raises profound ethical questions. Do we have the right to condemn future generations to such an existence? Is it fair to create human populations that can never return to Earth, that will live their entire lives as prisoners of technology in environments that barely support life? These aren't abstract philosophical concerns. The children born on the moon, if any ever are, will face medical challenges we can barely imagine. Their bones and muscles, developed in low gravity, may make it impossible for them to ever visit Earth. They will be permanent exiles from the world that created their parents. Yet despite all these challenges, despite the enormous costs and the questionable economics and the fundamental risks to human welfare, I believe we must attempt lunar colonization anyway. Not because it makes economic sense, not because it's easy or safe or profitable, but because the alternative is worse. The universe is not a benevolent place. Asteroid impacts, gamma-ray bursts, supervolcanic eruptions, climate change, and countless other threats could end human civilization without warning. As long as we remain confined to a single planet, we remain vulnerable to complete extinction, from events beyond our control. But more than that, attempting to establish permanent human settlements beyond Earth will teach us things about ourselves and our capabilities that we cannot learn any other way. The challenges of lunar colonization will force us to develop new technologies, new social systems, and new ways of thinking about sustainability and cooperation. The closed-loop life support systems developed for lunar bases will teach us how to live more sustainably on Earth. The experience of maintaining technological systems in harsh environments will prepare us for climate change and resource depletion. The necessity of cooperation in life or death situations will hopefully teach us new models of international collaboration. The Moon represents humanity's first examination in cosmic survival. It's an open-book test where we can use all our technology, all our knowledge, and all our resources. But it's also a test where failure means death, where there are no second chances, and where the margin for error is essentially zero. Whether we pass this test will determine not just our future in space, but our future as a species. The same qualities that enable lunar colonization, the ability to think long-term, to cooperate on massive scales, to solve complex technological problems, and to accept delayed gratification, are exactly the qualities we need to address existential challenges here on Earth. In my final analysis, the question of lunar colonization is really a question about human potential. Can we become the kind of species that builds cities on other worlds? Can we learn to think beyond our tribal boundaries and immediate self-interest? Can we develop the technological and social systems necessary to ensure our survival in an indifferent universe? The Moon waits for our answer, patient and silent, 250,000 miles away. Whether we ever establish a permanent human presence, there may matter less than what we learn about ourselves in the attempt. The future of human consciousness in the cosmos hangs in the balance, and the clock is ticking.